All right, I'm trying to get this to work. I don't know why it's not playing our theme music. So yeah, there we are. There we go. Good morning, everybody. We are here. We are live at cliffcentral.com, coming to you this morning from my house, Sia's house, and Pumi's house. And Simpiwe is in the studio with Homolem, making sure that everything happens. We had that discussion the other day about getting back into the studio and maybe doing the show from there. And remember when, like, we were late to start, and then Sia made the good point that, well, when we were in the studio, we were late some mornings too. So there's no way. We are unreliable. It's just it's in our blood.
Never late. Everybody else is just early.
Hang on, Sia, I can't hear you for some reason. Say that again.
We're never late. Everybody else is just early.
Oh, this is annoying.
Oh, no.
I can hear Sia. Sia.
Testing. 1, 2, 3.
6,
Hold on, Sia, let me
5,
see what's going on here.
4,
Talk to me.
3, 2,
Yes, Sia.
1.
Oh, there he is.
No. Oh,
there you are.
am I live?
There you are. You are live.
Okay.
How irritating. So this morning, on Monday, one of the reasons we started late is because Eskom were load shedding, and I see that they're very proud of themselves. They managed to get some power generation up and running. And this morning, I woke up, and how lucky am I? I don't just get power problems. This morning, I had no water, which is just lovely. So apparently, there's a burst pipe up the road, and they've been trying to fix it all night. And the guys had to go home at some point. Can you imagine fixing a burst water pipe at night? That's cold in winter. So I'm gonna be
in winter.
Yeah, I'm just gonna be a little bit more sympathetic than I normally would. Normally I'd be like, oh, water. But I'm thinking about those poor dudes who are busy fixing the water pipe, and I'm like, I wouldn't want to do that. No one would, right?
Yeah, in this weather right now, no, thank you.
One of my favorite things to do, and I said this to Pumi when we were just waiting for you, Sia, this morning, just before the show started, is to keep a list of all the places in the world. And I keep, on that weather app, you can have 10, 15 places that you can keep an eye on. Mm-hmm. So I always like to keep an eye on certain places. So I always check out Kandahar in Afghanistan, which is now a balmy 29 degrees in Kandahar. Do you see that?
Why exactly are you keeping track of that?
Just so you know, Sia, you don't do this?
No.
I have the same thing.
It's supposedly now they're about they're at least in spring, maybe even in summer in Calgary in Canada, and it's 3 degrees. That's spring into summer in Calgary in Canada. That is frighteningly shit. Mecca is always a balmy 31. There we go.
Oh yes. Very close to what they have in Dubai, which is also 31. Right.
And here's Antarctica, minus
goodness gracious. Do I even know where my weather app is? Why would I use my weather app?
No, I just like to do it. I always joke about old people, and I think, Pums, you were on the show when we were talking about how our parents like to watch those weather things. They always put the weather and the end of the news, and then they have the weather channel. I like this just because if Antarctica is minus 47, then I'm not going to moan so much, about how, my little feet are cold. And imagine living in minus 47 degrees. And there are parts of Russia, by the way, that were... that are consistently in the minus 30 all year round.
Gosh.
Absolutely. So I keep on my weather app, I keep all the places. So the last places I've been to, right? So when I go to a new place, then I take one of them off. But my quota is full, and I keep the places I've been to because every now and again I'd like to find out what the weather's like in Krakow. And kind of think, it wasn't that cold when I was there.
You've been to hang on, there we are. You've actually been to Krakow though?
Yes.
See, I haven't. I've never been to Poland, so I don't really know.
Oh, and they have salt mines there, right? And they have this.
Mine. Hang on,
Yeah.
Pums. I'm now having trouble again with your sound here. Just give me 1 second. Talk to me.
Hello, 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 hello,
One sec.
hello, hello, hello. See,
What
can you hear me?
Yeah, I've been hearing you this whole time.
There we go. Okay, now you're back. There's like an irritating sort of high-pitched sound back there. It's driving me mad. Anyway, we'll figure it out.
Should we all get off and come on at different times?
This is like those meetings that never start on time when they
unmute yourself.
Yeah.
I'll jump off and jump on just for safety's sake.
Let me just see if I can fix this. Might have been Sia, hey? Pums?
Because it's gone now.
Yeah, it has.
So while he's gone, let's just talk about him.
Let's see if he comes back and it's gone now. So it sounds much.
No, so I have to tell you about the salt mine in Krakow.
It sounds horrible.
It sounds horrible, but it's actually like a spectacular thing to see. And it's underground, and when you go, they have a museum, so you can go on a tour of it, and they have a chapel. So the miners down there, with all those many years ago, had created a chapel, and in the chapel, the entire, so a lot of Eastern Europe is still very Catholic. And the entire chapel is carved with salt figurines. So the cross, the stations of the cross, the whole thing is salt figurines, and it's the most fascinating thing to see. Absolutely amazing.
I mean, that sounds beautiful, but it's still a salt mine, and a salt mine is. Horrible place to work. I mean, like a salt mine has got to be one of the worst places to work. You know what it does to your skin?
It is, though. It is. And it's dark and it's damp. Look, it's a mine. It's a mine. So and unlike, I don't know if you've been to the gold mines here, any of the gold mines or platinum mines that are very cramped. Yeah, it counts. That's very cramped, and the closer you get to kind of the coal face, it's very small, and the salt mine's not like that. It's quite it's open, and there's you can walk upright throughout the whole tour of the thing.
You have led 11 lives, I'm telling you.
Just live at the edge, Sia. Live on the edge.
You know just about everything. I don't know comparisons between salt and gold mines. Girl, all I know is Goldridge sits in Horizon Deep from Istingo. That's all I know.
It's an experience. It is. And it's one of the things to see in Poland is the salt mine in Krakow.
That's like one of the main attractions.
In Poland?
Yeah.
No.
In the city of Krakow.
In the city of Krakow.
Your city's pretty horrible if you have to show people a salt mine to get them to come.
If that's the thing.
Bitleng says, because he watched the TV show last night, Bitleng says, Gareth, you looked a bit nervous last night. Was it because you guys were going live or because of the guests? I was worried the union guy who was on last week, Ibrahim Harvey with us, was going to take over and eventually walk out. Well, it's funny you say I was nervous. I felt way better doing the recording, doing the show live last night than I do with the recordings. What do you think, Sia? You were there. Well, the live element excites me. It's like doing this show in the mornings. If we weren't doing this live, I wouldn't want to do it. It always feels like a rehearsal. When you're doing it live, whatever happens. And in fact, about halfway through the third segment of the show last night, the show stopped broadcasting. Now it wasn't anything we were doing on our side. Apparently, it was an ENCA multi-choice issue, but there's always something always goes wrong on that show. So I've kind of stopped being upset about things. I carried on, and apparently the repeats will all be fine.
Yeah, the repeats will be fine, and we debated a little as to tell you or not, but we thought if you carry on, because it was only a couple of minutes, at least it's still recorded. And I know if we told you, it would have it would have changed the dynamic. But I knew something was going on in the control room when everyone started panicking in technicalese. And I'm like, can someone speak English and tell me what is happening? They're like, green light satellite, signal 443 and the 442. Okay, call extension 978 and then tell them that the 3-point turn of the 76 degree. And I'm like, what does that mean?
Yeah,
what
knows.
is everyone saying? So, yeah. And then finally, people who are watching from home are like, hey, you guys are frozen. I'm like, thanks. Now I know what's happening.
Yeah, very much. So Nico says, Gareth, I expected more of a fight last night from your guests, but more importantly, did Sia shit his pants again at 21:06 when you got cut off from 9:50 for 5 minutes? All right. So, Pumi, we've
from the sounds of it, it's very close. It was very close.
Speaking of the sounds of it, we figured out that Pumi is the one whose sound is high pitched. I don't know, but when you muted your microphone just now, it went away. So maybe you go and come back in.
Okay. Bye.
We'll see now. So, all right. Sia did not shit his pants last night, but yeah, the show went. If I could do it live every week, I would.
It was very fun to do so. There was a different dynamic in the air, like people are buzzing around and people are moving, and you watch that clock so closely. It's like, 1 hour to go until live and 30 minutes to go until live, and it's nice and exciting.
The only problem part of it was when I crossed to, because I can, they can hear me in the control room. So during one of the commercial breaks, I'm like, yeah, this is way better. Can't we do the show live every week? So the TV producer says, yeah, we can. It's going well. But the crew don't like it. And I'm like, oh, God, these poor people. Because they've been on shift from like lunchtime. And so for them, they don't want to work until we finished at 9:30? Yeah, so
but they also have to stay on and do a couple of other things as well.
Exactly. But usually they're out of there aren't they usually gone by like 8:30, that crew? When we put live, they have to stay for an hour. No, 8 o'clock. So we make them stay for an extra hour and a half. I would be pissed off too.
Well, that's not really our problem. Supposedly, now this is real internal talk. Someone delayed an email to tell the crew to stay on and tell them about our show. So it's someone else's miscommunication. It's not that they were actually unhappy to be there.
I know, but I would be unhappy if I were in that crew, and then I'd say, this Gareth and his stupid show. And if that's what people are thinking when they start working on our show with us, then I'm quite upset about it. Well, I don't know how to manage to do
it. Gareth, I mean, you say that about being unhappy because we come across many different people who are in service positions, and they have a whole lot of stuff going on in the back of their workday, and then it impacts the people at the front. I don't know, if you still have a job to do and you still have to do the job well, whether you're like feeling disgruntled in that very moment of like 5 extra minutes of inconvenience. Come on. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's
well,
right.
I don't want the crew to all feel, oh God, we're here for this stupid show and it's taking an extra hour out of our night. I don't know. That's just me. Anyway.
Well, goodness only knows how long they stayed there afterwards, because with that technical issue, supposedly just as we were wrapping up our show, the freezing issue started again, and they didn't have any bulletin prepared for 10 p.m. So there was a point where they actually asked, do you think Gareth could stay and perhaps do the bulletin at 10? I'm like, he will not.
Hell no.
Let us get up here. We are not going to entertain that.
I should have said yes.
I was going to personally drag you there and drag you out of there and go, we are not.
Oh my God. Imagine if they made me do the news bulletin, because we would do it like we do the news here. with like 90% commentary and actually 10% news, it would have been hilarious. They would have lost their license.
You just have
Are
to
you
do a
saying
live read.
No, Holmes, you know me. I'd be like, Ace Magashule and Zuma those fucking morons. Can you imagine? I would have been fired in like 5 seconds flat. It would have been terrible.
There were 2 points talking, using the word like moron and whatnot. There were like 2 points in the show where I thought, do we actually have like, this is why one of my concerns were, are we live, or is there like a 4-second delay? Because there were 2 times during yesterday's show where I thought, are we allowed to say that? I don't know. I didn't know you could say ass on like TV, like primetime TV now.
Oh, you can.
Oh, yeah, you can.
Okay, how we've moved.
We have moved along. I mean, ass would have been verboten. What Pumi like 20 years ago, you couldn't have said ass, even 10 maybe, but now it's okay.
So ass isn't so like, and I think they have like a PG rating for things like news commentary. I haven't seen Gareth's rating, but they always have some kind of rating. And the rating kind of covers you for light, heavy language. Heavy language.
Beautiful. Well, I'm very excited this morning, and for many people who have been nervous as hell, I said to Sia yesterday while we were getting ready for the TV show, I said to him, I can't wait to speak to Sean Sanders today, because crypto has been fun. I even had a dream last night. And you know when like reality starts seeping into my dreams, we've got problems. So I said to Sia, I don't have a huge portfolio. We've discussed this a couple of times on the show. I don't have millions of rands invested. I don't have hundreds of thousands of rands. But I watched my entire portfolio halve in value yesterday. I watched it halve. When you see your money, imagine if it was your whole bank account.
Did you watch? Did
Yes,
you actually? Did you go online and actually check it out, or did you just because the memes are hilarious? I was just
people were losing it.
No, it was bad. So I even dreamed last night that the Ethereum founder Vitalik Buterin had invited me to some conference, and then the weirdest thing is I go on this morning and he's on Instagram because I follow him, right? He's one of those Instagram accounts that's private. So I follow him and he's doing a conference. So I'm like, what the hell does this mean? Is my dream a portent? Is it going to get worse? Is it going to get better? I shat myself. Horrible. So here's a comment from Duncan just before we move on from the TV show. Duncan says, what are the ratings like in the ENCA show? Well, this is one of the hardest things I've ever had to interpret in my life because they are not measuring. So, okay, first of all, there's an ETV rating, which is great. I mean, we've got like hundreds of thousands of people watching the show on E. But on ENCA, it varies wildly. Anywhere between, 12, 14,000, all the way up to like 50,000 people in that window. And don't ask me how they get those ratings. And also don't ask me how consistent it is, because one week it's like down here, the next week it's up there. And you try and figure out whether it's the guests or whether it's the topic that you're talking about. And there's no pattern. So it's really hard to figure.
No.
It's also about the news cycle. It's also about the news cycle, depending because of where you are in the programming.
So I'll always tell you like the truth about these things, because then if the show ends, I've been honest with you from the beginning. But it's not. Those ratings are apparently really good, but they're not as good as they had hoped some of the time. Although sometimes we outdo them, and then they end up having to pay us more. Because I've built this thing into the contract where if we do really well, we earn more per show, and if we do below a certain threshold, they have to pay us the bare minimum. So it's very complicated, Sia. I mean, you
There's
don't
so
understand.
there's
I've
so
shown
many
you the numbers.
particulars. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like, oh, it was a long weekend here, so the
yeah,
trends are people go away for long weekends. So that was the dip, but then there was actually the president spoke on this night, and then you guys followed afterwards. So that was
right.
the peak. I don't know.
And the weirdest part is like the shows that I've really loved, the ratings aren't as good as I thought they would be. And then the shows that I
Shame.
thought were boring are the ones that do really well. So I have no idea of how to make sense of this. And Pumi, you've done TV for years as well. It's very complicated.
It is. It is.
Shit.
Look, see, Tracy's talking about TAMS, this
Yeah,
Nielsen survey as well, which also
right.
tells you how many people, but it also tells you based on signal and how many people the signal goes out to, but also they do telephones, kind of like a dipstick, you know. They
Survey.
used to do a dipstick survey of checking people and just calling them, hey, how you know, did you watch
Right.
TV in the past 7 days? Which channels
Yeah.
did you watch?
Oh wow.
I mean, who can
It's all
remember
very
that?
scientific,
You
really.
asked me that stuff. I remember once I got the radio survey, and it was a 7-day diary I had to fill in. And just for fun, I only filled in my show and nothing else. I didn't pay any attention. I mean, I was doing the show, so it wasn't a lie. But I didn't fill anything else in. And because I was part of the sample audience, this is when we were still on 5FM. Believe it or not, the ratings diary that month was more or less the same. So I don't think these are very scientific ways of measuring. And Tracy says as much. She says there's a bit of a thumbsuck and very scientific calculations involved. Yeah, but the bit of a thumbsuck kind of, in a world of internet where I can tell you immediately how many people are really listening to us live now, it
Right.
seems like that kind of measurement is just so old school. It's like something left
It
over
is,
from
and
the
it's extrapolations. A lot of it is extrapolations, but also, so you'd have better numbers on ETV because E is free to air. So
yes,
theoretically, there are more people who have access to that platform than there are on ENCA, which is pay per view.
but they don't care. I mean,
Yeah.
we've got hundreds of thousands of people watching it on ETV, but they don't care about that. They're not basing their ratings on that. They're only interested in it from an ENCA point of view. So it's very weird. It's
Tons
hard.
of people watching online as well.
Oh, yeah.
And they
Oh, yeah.
don't factor that in.
They don't count. Yeah. All right.
But look, I'm only just remembering this because we're talking about channels and what you watch,
Mhm.
etc., etc. It has nothing to do with so what now, but it's just a funny story. A friend's friend of mine once discovered that his girlfriend was cheating on him one silly little day when he went over to her house,
Yeah.
and she lives alone, is never interested in sport, but switched on the television and it was on like the 200s channel. So that's one of the sports channels. And he went, like, what would she be doing watching sport? So he asked, hey, was anyone did you get any visitors recently? Who was here? She goes, oh, no one. That like sent an extra, okay. And he says, well, but the TV's on the sport channel. You never watch sport. And then she just went blank and she starts stammering. She goes, you know what? Actually, the electricity tripped the other day. So I think like when the system reboots, she goes, this DSTV will never reboot, and then just jump to like channel 203. So that set him off. He started investigating, found out that yes, she was cheating. How
Oh my God.
Rookie error, girl.
That's terrible.
It's
That's
the
how you
not being able to think on your feet for me.
That's how you find out that someone's cheated on you. Ugh, how horrible.
Oh, shame.
Like she could have just said, I don't know, I was channel hopping.
We can laugh now because he's over it. Shame.
What a horrible way to find out, because a sport channel. I'd be doubly upset because of that.
Clearly,
So
the guy was over and had all of the time in the world to luxuriate and watch TV.
Speaking
Luxuriate.
of relationships and such, this is probably one of the worst things I've seen on social media in a long time. I want you to watch this clip of its. There's a show. See, it's called what? First Dates or something.
First Dates. Remember when Gugu was on a dating show? He was on the South African version of it.
Yes, that's right. So what they do is they send a couple on their first date to a restaurant, and then they film it. So it's all very weird. But look how badly this one goes, and then I'll have your comments afterwards. I'm particularly interested to hear what Pumi says of this. So look at this quickly.
Yeah, she's not rude apparently.
I realise there's a lot of opposites between us. I text my friends a lot. I'll be 2 seconds, babe. I just want to go. I just don't like him.
Does he know you're going?
I just said I'm going back. I'm not.
Okay. So she's left.
Okay.
Yeah. I just wanted to check in that you're all right and everything.
Yeah, it's all good.
Okay, good. Good. Feel free to finish your drink. If you want dessert, you can have a dessert.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
That's all good.
Poor guy. So this guy.
Did he cry?
I don't know if he cried, but if he'd be well within his rights to. I mean, I just want to say that there is nothing more.
I saw a little.
Yeah, there might have been
quiver.
a tear. I just think it's nothing more disgusting than someone who can't even summon up the courage to just tell you this is not working. You know, like if a date's not going well, just go over to the dude and say to him, listen, this is not working, man. Can we just have a drink and like call it quits? How weak do you have to be that girl to go to the maitre d' or the waitress or whoever it is and say to her, I'm not going back. Won't you just tell him I've left? Unbelievable. In fact, she didn't even say that. She just left. And it was up to the waitress to go over and say to him, hey, I just got to tell you she's gone. I'm like, what kind of pathetic human being? Because there's no way that girl could ever amount to anything in her life. She can't even face up to her responsibilities around a date. First of all, she should never have agreed to be on the TV show if she knew that was going to happen, because she's so absolutely devoid of the ability to even like man up for her own decisions. And she uses the excuse that she's on her phone, and then she just goes away. She just walks away. Unbelievable, right?
So I always wonder when we watch the stuff like that, how much of it is this person would have really done that, and it's made for TV. Somebody was just like, you should go. Because I can't believe that somebody would be like, really?
I just think it's so awful. Pums, I think there are people like that. I mean, you know, these people who, for example, they're all talk on social media or on a dating app. I mean, I've heard from friends of mine who are on dating apps, so I'm not on them, but one of my friends who's on there says every time he accepts like a Tinder date in real life and he goes for a Tinder date with somebody, he'll arrive at the restaurant and he's always like 50-50 about whether they're even going to pitch. You know?
Oh, people are disgustingly flaky.
That is so flaky. It's like next level flaky. It's so bad. You have to be so weak as a person, and so cowardly to not be able to man up and just go over and say, "Listen, sorry, dude, you're not what I expected. This is not working. No hard feelings. We're on a TV show. We may as well be honest with each other." You know?
Look, I'm not as direct as you are, Gareth, so I wouldn't have been honest with someone I'm on a date with that much. I would have lied to get out of there. Like,
okay.
Oh, sorry, my mother. You know how mothers are. Sorry, I have to go. At least to get myself out of it. And then if this makes me a weak person, sure, but I would have then like done it over text or calling them afterwards, going, "Hey, sorry, it's not working out." But just no, I can't say to someone's face.
You know, I have seen people and read people who are on dating apps, and one of the things that they do to give themselves an out is tell your friends. So tell your friends, I'm going on this date, call me 20 minutes in. And,
Right.
you know,
Yes.
and if it's not going great, that's going to be, I got this call, I have to go. Or you
Yes.
can tell your friends, listen, this is cool, I got this. But
Mm-hmm.
I was just like, so, listen, y'all, dating sounds like a minefield. It's a whole
It's
other pandemic on its own.
It's
correct,
another
and
pandemic.
it's so difficult to navigate that, isn't it? I mean, that's really tough stuff. Okay, well, we've got to get to headlines. It is 6:30. The 5 things you need to know. Let me go and see what's going on in the news and let you know what we've discovered this morning. By the way, if you want to get hold of us, 079 748 2090. That is the WhatsApp line. You can also message us directly to screen on YouTube, which is happening as we speak. And if you've got something you want to add into the show, then by all means, throw it at us. There are lots of people talking about that date. I just want to quickly refer to Ruth's comment here. She says, stick it out politely for 20 minutes and then excuse yourself. That's not going to hurt you. It's not going to kill you. It's not going to ruin your life. You're on a TV show, for heaven's sake, right?
But what do you say as you excuse yourself? You have to fess up to something.
Well, as you say, Sia, you either make up a story, which, I mean, I think maybe at some level people can sense that you're not being honest, but at least you're being, you're making it an excuse that doesn't make them feel terrible. You're like, oh, my
Yes.
mom called or whatever. And as Pumi says, you have a friend call you, then you can get away with it. But to just disappear, to just leave, it's like people, this idea of ghosting, which I absolutely despise on social media. I'm not saying it's happened to me because I don't think I remember any such occasion, but there is no worse thing than not being able to face up to a person, even virtually, let alone in real life. What kind of a person are you going to grow up to be if you cannot face up to your challenges in life? How have you been raised?
Sia,
How have you been raised?
Sia, that
been
looks
raised?
like a very good guilty face.
Yeah,
How
I
have
hate
you been
those
raised?
people who ghost. Oh, what do it?
What kind of job have your parents done if you ghost people instead of just telling them, hey, listen, it's over or whatever?
I believe that there's a time and place for ghosting someone.
No.
When? Don't believe it. All right, let's do the headlines. We can always come back to this afterwards. So first thing, the Optimum coal story continues. Optimum gave Eskom an ultimatum to meet its demands. That's what Matsela Koko had to say at the Zondo Commission. Yes, he was back there again. A former Eskom CEO, Matsela Koko, said that he eventually decided to invoke a clause that allowed the power utility to acquire the mining rights of Optimum coal mine because the mine attempted blackmail and extortion. Do you believe any of this, Pums? You're our go-to Zondo Commission person.
Listen here, Matsela Koko. And move on. Next story,
I think
please.
let's just leave it. Yeah, it's enough.
Next
This guy's-
story, please. Our
he's got the
tweeting
credit.
engineer.
Yeah, exactly. In other news, Higher Education Minister Bladen Zimande says that there was enough money in the country to fund free higher education, but the issue was that it was held by private individuals. Blade, that old communist. Blade thinks your money belongs to him. Blade thinks he can take your money. He doesn't know how money he's made. He's never worked in the private sector in his life. Blade
You
has
know what
never
that
made.
sounds like?
What?
It sounds like when there's that clip of Shepherd Bushiri, that pastor that skipped the country, saying, the good news is I have secured, I don't know, like 500 million to build our new super church complex.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in your pockets.
Yeah, well, Blade, that old communist, he says, because he's under pressure to deliver firm proposals on funding to Cabinet by the end of next month for higher education. He said his department was working hard on developing the proposals, but it urged the private sector to partner with them to create a loan scheme for students who belonged to the missing middle category. So Blade says, you know what? The problem isn't that billions and billions and billions have been stolen from South Africa by me and my compatriots in the ANC, and we've allowed this to happen under our watch, because Blade's been a minister since, 1997 or something? Anyway, he says, no, that's not the problem. The problem is those people who have money because they've worked and earned that money and built businesses of value, that money really should be ours. Then we would be able to afford all of this stuff. Blade, you already own like 40% of what those people are bringing in, sometimes a little more. So you are not entitled to whatever's left. You're just not. That's called theft, Blade. And I know to you it's the same thing, but it's really not. So anyway, he says that that's where we'll get the money to pay for everyone else's education. Then in other news, Julius Malema is in breach of the ethics code and should be withdrawn as a JSC, that's a Judicial Services Commission candidate. The Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution, I presume that's an NGO, they have complained to Parliament's Registrar of Members over Julius Malema's unsubstantiated attacks on the judiciary and his conduct at the JSC. CASAC's Executive Secretary Lawson Naidu has asked the registrar to comment to Parliament's Joint Committee on Ethics and Members' Interests that Julius Malema is in breach of the Ethics Code and should be withdrawn as the National Assembly's delegate to the JSC. At a press briefing on the 30th of March, a day after he appeared in the East London Regional Court on firearms-related charges, Malema echoed a term used by a corruption-accused former President Jacob Zuma and repeated the sentiments of the so-called RET, that's the Radical Economic Transformation grouping in the ANC, that prosecutions were selective. So if you're going to interfere in the judiciary, which Malema is hardly loath to do, then should you be on the committee that appoints judges? No, that's what they're saying. So let's see what happens with that. In America, Republicans have defied Trump to back a Capitol riot probe. I do not understand why there are still people who are obsessing about Donald Trump. He's gone. He's out of there. He doesn't even have Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or anything else. And I think that's helped him, by the way. I think that's made him seem more reasonable because he's not tweeting from the toilet at 3 a.m. He actually comes across as being smarter now because we have such short memories, right? And to keep dragging him into things is hurting the Republicans. I don't think it's doing them any good. There's no doubt that the Capitol riots were a disaster. That was probably the catalyst for so much of what went wrong for Donald Trump after that. So the Republicans are calling now for a probe into the Capitol riots, which, by the way, turn out to have been a real damp squib, despite the symbolism of those riots and the fact that these crazy people broke into the actual building at Congress. 35 Republicans have defied their party leaders and former President Donald Trump by siding with the Democrats by 252 to 175 to establish the inquiry. Mr. Trump had urged Republicans to vote against the Democrat trap. The bill looks unlikely to pass the upper chamber. Top Senate Republican Mitch McConnell called it slanted. The inquiry will be modeled on the commission that investigated the 9/11 attacks on New York and Washington. So we're not the only country with our Zondo Commission. There are other countries like the US who are establishing commissions to investigate things like the Capitol riots. And from the BBC this morning, the Nord Stream 2, this is interesting. The US has lifted sanctions on apparently on an ally of Russia's, Vladimir Putin, who leads the firm behind the Nord Stream 2 project. The move came in a report on Russian sanctions delivered by Congress to the Department of State. Critics say the pipeline is a major geopolitical prize for the Kremlin. The project, which would take gas from the Russian Arctic under the Baltic Sea to Germany, is 95% complete. But the US has decided they're going to waive sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 company. And that's because, obviously, they're building a gas pipeline between Russia and Germany. So that's probably good news for Russia, right? The Russians will be pleased about that because they don't want sanctions. They don't like the idea of any of their leaders being restricted in any way with their money or their travel or anything else. So we'll see what happens.
Likes sanctions.
No one likes sanctions. Just ask the people in Zimbabwe. Doesn't help anybody.
Sanctions.
Okay, quick email from Jared, who sent me this last week. He says, congrats on 7 years at Cliff Central. It was around this time last year I listened for the first time. So welcome, Jared, for your first year, your first year anniversary. Lockdown had just begun, and I wanted to be somewhere else. I started listening to stations from all over the world on the TuneIn radio app. I remember choosing Johannesburg as a location, and the first station that came up was Cliff Central. That's cool.
Oh,
He says, I clicked and listened to a segment I later found out was the Burning Platform. I was hooked. I listened to TuneIn for a few days, and then I realized it was all on Apple Podcasts anyway. So every morning I would refresh the app and start my day by listening to the latest episode of your show. Gave me an escape in a time where most of us felt trapped. Since then, I've come to know you all, and honestly, I can't imagine not listening to you guys every day. Isn't that nice? Cliff Central's
that's
become an essential part of my life, and on this, your 7th anniversary, I wanted to say thank you for all that you guys do. You're certainly reaching the listeners who count. That's from Jared. So thanks, Jared. That's very nice of you.
Aw.
Cool.
Thank
Now,
you, Jared. Operative term there being essential listening, which means we are essential workers.
I know.
So
it
we
makes
should get vaccinated.
it so special.
Yes.
Are we? Oh, by the way, I met an elderly lady yesterday who said to me she went and lined up for the vaccine on Tuesday or Wednesday. And she said she had to wait for 5.5 hours in the queue. Now,
Oh.
she's an old lady. I think if you are under the age of 60, you should not be lining up and taking up space now. You should let the old people go. We all must go later. Don't you think, Pumi? Let the old
Dude.
people get it. They need it more than you do. They're more at risk. And frankly, they can't stand in a queue for 5 hours.
South Africans, we like to complain about like corruption and people going ahead of others. And then when it's us, when it's our turn to do it, we don't even think
Right.
twice.
Mm.
It's the same thing, people. It's the same thing.
Duncan says, Sia, you look like you want to fall asleep during the news. Is the news boring to you, Sia? I mean, if it's boring,
Sorry,
to you, let me
Duncan. Sorry, Duncan. This is my face. I don't know what to do with it.
It's resting bitch face look.
This
is a
is
good
just what you
story.
get.
Gary says, hey, Gareth, did you see that Demi Lovato has announced that she's now non-binary and refers to herself as they? What a stuffed up world. I did see that story. I actually posted something on my Instagram. Does anyone give two shits about some celebrity in Hollywood who's clearly on an attention-seeking spree? That's all it is, right? Why? I mean, to call Demi Lovato they, first of all, I don't speak to Demi Lovato. So, and do you,
Oh.
does anyone who's listening to us now who's regularly talking to Demi Lovato? Because the fact that this is a news story and now we all need to call her they just shows you how ridiculous it is. None of us, as far as I can tell, are seeing her on a regular basis. So does it affect us? Zero. It affects us. Not at all. Fuck them. It doesn't
Oh.
matter. They are not
Wow.
important to us.
That
You use the
escalated
right
quickly.
pronoun. Very, very.
The fact that them or they or whatever expect to be addressed in the plural or to be addressed in a gender non-binary fashion. It's like when Sam Smith did this. I'm like, who cares? If that isn't a
So
way to get into headlines, I don't know what is.
they're 28 years old. This was their short statement. It says, this comes after a lot of healing and self-reflective work. I'm still learning and coming into myself, and I don't aim to be an expert person. Sharing this with you now opens up another level of vulnerability for me. I'm doing this for those out there that actually haven't been able to share who they truly are with their loved ones. So please keep living in your truths and know I'm sending you so much love your way. XOXO. In my mind, that's how she sounds.
The next
that's how they sound. Oops.
The next person who says to me they're living their truth is going to get a smack upside the head. And who cares? Again,
Oh, whatever. Good for
self-involved. How self-involved do you have to be to think that the rest of us give two shits about how you identify? You know how you identify? You know when that matters? Matters to a 3-year-old who's playing fantasy games. 3-year-old, and I've got 2 nephews who went through that stage. They tell you I'm Luke Skywalker or I'm some I'm Superman. That's what they tell you at 3 years. I'm Superman. And what do you do with a 3-year-old? You go, of course you're Superman. Of course you are. And then they grow out of it. And by about 5 or 6, they start to realize that what they think they are is completely unimportant. Because if you want to live with other people, if you want to get along in society, if you want to make a life for yourself, it's not all about you. It's actually about other people too.
Live your life, Demi. Go right ahead.
Demi Lovato, 28 years old, and she's talking like a 3-year-old. Unreal.
Yo, her 28,
I had to Google.
their 28 is very, they've been around the block as opposed to,
It's always embarrassing for me when I have to Google who a person is. Like, it's always embarrassing. I do find it very embarrassing. And I saw the Demi Lovato, and I've been listening to YFM in my car. And they were talking about, and so I got to the office and had to Google Demi Lovato. Who's Demi Lovato? It was very, very embarrassing. But you are my friends, so I can share this with you.
No, don't be embarrassed.
Oh.
I don't watch her on TV, so I know she's a judge on some reality TV show, and that's about it. That's all I know. And she's a singer. That's it. So I don't feel bad, Pums. All right. It has been the most insane week ever in cryptocurrencies, and everyone is talking about the Bitcoin and Ethereum price this morning, and nobody can help us more than this man can. Here he is, Sean Sanders from Revix. Sean, what the F is going on, dude?
Morning, Gareth. Yeah, see, the market does go down as well, right? I mean, like 20 episodes straight of saying the market's going up. Finally, it's pulled back, and it pulled back hard, right? So, I mean, you're seeing Bitcoin sitting at around $39,500 right now. It got to a low of 30.
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay, by the way?
I can. It got down to 30, dude.
Yeah, well, on some exchanges it did. It got down to $38,000. It was insane. But I mean, across the market, when you aggregate the prices, it got down realistically to around the $36,000 level. Ethereum got down to $2,200. It's sitting at like $2,600 now. So it's a big pullback. I mean, we're 40% down from at least Bitcoin's high this year of around $65,000. But something that I don't think a lot of people realize, because most people are in since 2017, 2018 in the crypto space, is that generally through most bull cycles, you do see 30% pullbacks 3, 4, 5 times. I mean, in the 2017 bull run, which was nowhere near sort of the bull run we've seen today, you saw four pullbacks of over 30%. So this isn't completely out of the norm. And I think a lot of people are asking sort of what's caused this. And it started all with good old Musk and his crazy tweets. And, I guess it's controversial now, but, essentially Tesla came out on the 8th of February and they said that they were going to be using some of their cash as a company to buy Bitcoin instead of, holding dollars in reserve. That sent Bitcoin up, a lot. I think it went up about 15% in a single day. And then, they sold off a little bit of their cryptocurrency to prove that it's liquid. And then Musk also came out to say, well, listen, we are also going to permit people to buy Teslas using Bitcoin. And then kind of made a U-turn on that statement this last week, saying that Bitcoin's energy usage is far too high. And that's the mining, I suppose, when you're actually processing transactions and all the rest. And that then has sort of changed the sentiment in the market. But it's quite crazy just to believe that there's essentially one individual that's able to influence the market as much as he has. And I think just another news story as well that's kind of come out has been around the People's Bank of China. They came out on Tuesday with a statement. And I mean, China comes out with a statement like every 3 months. So this is not really big news. But they came out with a statement just reiterating that digital tokens, cryptocurrencies, aren't a means of payment, and they're not the same as fiat currencies, and people should, be aware of the risks involved and all the rest. So that wasn't really a big news story. But I mean, it just goes to show crypto is extremely volatile, yeah?
So just if we look at what's actually happened over the last 3 or 4 days, we saw it drop all the way down, and we've seen it climb right back up to 40 almost. I know you're not here to give us financial advice, but there are a whole lot of people who entered the market this year. Some of them may be Revix customers, and they're looking at this and they saw their portfolio basically halve in value over like one day. And now they're seeing it ticking back up. People need to know, especially new investors and people who don't have an idea of the history of the Bitcoin price or the Ethereum price or anything else over the last 3 or 4 years. They need to know that this is not the most bizarre thing that's ever happened, and that most of this is pretty predictable, or at least that there's something going on here that we can make sense of.
Yeah, cryptocurrencies are super volatile, right? We've said that so many times. And it's also weird when we, I suppose, see just such a long stretch, like what we've seen recently, where it's been week-on-week gains. I mean, there's been very few weeks when we've spoken about big pullbacks. And it's weird. It's, the markets all work like this. It's not just the cryptocurrency markets where they sort of gradually increase. I mean, even if crypto is sort of gradually increased at a faster rate than many other markets. And then when they pull back and the market declines in value, it generally pulls back quite sharply. And the other thing is, I mean, you saw yesterday, we had so many customers coming to us going, what's going on in the market? We've lost 25, 30% in a single day. You've got to realize that there's thousands and thousands of people out there that are just freaking out as retail investors, as everyday people, and they're just selling. And that results in these really erratic moves down. And it doesn't quite work in the same way when the market's moving up. When the market's moving up, you don't have everyone just running around going crazy, being like, buy, 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 buy. When the market's falling, people are running around going crazy, going sell, 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 sell. So it is, I think, one of those emotional times right now where you do need to know that this has happened many, many times before in crypto. When I first joined the crypto scene, back when it was actually not the crypto scene, it was more just Bitcoin, 30 to 40% moves on a daily basis were completely normal, right? And the market's matured a lot since then. But this will happen again.
But this is exactly what happens. So, I mean, I remember when Anthea used to tell us about shares on the Joburg Stock Exchange. And when it was going well, people were like, oh, we love this, Anthea. This is so great. And then they expect it to always be on the up. And there's just no way that can happen. I mean, Ethereum this morning is saying buy, 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 which is what you're saying. Is part of the reason that we have these panic buys and panic sells, is because people jump in. Would you say at this stage it's at a price where you would buy more, or do you think that people should just hold on to what they've got and see what happens?
I mean, if you've made an investment and you're sitting with a small loss right now, hold on, in my opinion. Again, not financial advice, but what I do, that's what I would do. I actually, I took a long position yesterday. I think that this is a fantastic buying opportunity. Again, not financial advice. Don't go copying me. Don't go overexpose yourself to crypto either. It's a super volatile asset class. And the other thing is, let's be realistic. Can this pull back further? Can this come back down to $30,000? Of course. But the opportunity that I see here is that I do see Bitcoin hitting $100,000 before the end of this year. And if you do see that, again, there's a probability of that occurring. There's also a probability of it pulling back. If you think that there's more upside potential ahead than downside, obviously you vote with your money, right? And that's the beauty of markets. So I think it is just a reminder to everyone out there that crypto is volatile, right? Don't put your life savings into it. We've said this so many times, and there's a reason that you say this, right? It's that you don't want to ever have an investment where you go to bed at night freaking out about this investment. If at the moment you are feeling that, I feel like you're overexposed to a particular investment or asset class. And I think, I get my 2 cents worth of advice is look at the way you're feeling now. Because remember, investing is as much as of an emotional game as it is everything else, right? Look at how you're feeling. Like, really realize the emotions that you've gone through. And if you have been freaking out at the crypto market pulling back, you're probably overexposed. And if you haven't been freaking out, then good for you.
And also, I mean, there are people who get a thrill out of those ups and downs. All those people who are feeling terrible about it now and are going, oh no, I can't believe my portfolio is halved. And I was complaining about this to Sia yesterday. The fact is, those people were ecstatic when they were doubling their money and tripling their money and 10 timesing their money just a couple of days ago. So you got to be in for the long haul.
Yeah, that's the weird thing, right? Is when the market's increasing, everyone's like, oh, I've missed out. I'm never going to get into crypto. Then the market pulls back 40%. It's like, no way, I'm not touching this. It's all just a Ponzi scheme. It's fake money, blah, blah, blah. So you can't win either way. But that's just human nature, right? It's emotions.
Yeah. Well, welcome to the real vagaries of the market. And this proves that cryptocurrency is coming into its own. Because if it was all win all the time, there'd be something wrong. And by the way, the markets in general yesterday took a bit of a hammering. I saw that, and this is bound to happen. By the way, I mean when Joe Biden has gone and spent $10 trillion of money that he's just been printing, then what do you expect to happen? You expect the markets to just be perfectly stable, and you expect inflation to stay exactly where it was? That's not going to happen either.
Yeah, oh my gosh, my best advice that I can give anyone out there right now: do not be holding fiat currency. You are going to, over the long term, lose all your fiat currency. Over the next 10 to 20 years, that fiat currency will become not just worth less, but worthless. So that's my take on this.
Well, I'm gonna end it on that, but I will say that the best advice of all, and again, nothing that we give here is advice. This is all purely interesting, and we've got people like Sean who know what's going on in crypto. Someone says here, talking to Sean about Bitcoin is like asking people at a Metallica concert if they like Metallica. That's true. He does care about crypto more than the average person, but that also helps us to figure things out. But it is important to know that in times like this, you need to diversify. Revix allows you to effortlessly own a diversified portfolio of the world's top cryptocurrencies, which automatically stays up to date with the ever-changing market. And you can follow them on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for all the updates as they happen in real time at Revix Invest. And you can sign up today for free. Thanks, Sean. Nice to see you.
Great, guys. Thanks so much. Chat you later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye.
Oh, but Gareth, I have a slight correction around a message we received earlier. Eleutheria actually said, she didn't say bye, bye, bye. She said, bye, 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 bye.
Oh, God. Are we doing NSYNC? Oh. Do you remember NSYNC? God, do you remember that band?
I just had to give her the arm movements as well.
Oh, my God. Anyway, you know what people are like. I mean, we have such short memories. Hey, Pumi.
See, look at how much fun Sia is having right this minute.
I had to bring you into my head because as soon as I saw that message, I don't want to be a friend to you, but another child of you. I'm crazy, but it ain't no lie, baby. Bye. Okay, goodbye.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Sia. Thank you.
Yeah, unreal. Good says we have got to huddle, which is hold. You know that old
Hold.
I'm excited about the burning platform. This morning we're going to speak to Gabriel Crouse, who's been a regular attendee of the Burning Platform panel discussions here on cliffcentral.com. This morning he will be back to tussle with me and with Pumi about his own findings in a really interesting report on critical race theory and race-based policy. And they've done some research at the IRR, which is always useful because we often have analysts on the show, and they are analysts who are analyzing other people's information, or they're analyzing the general political landscape, and that's good. But with Gabriel, he actually does surveys on the ground, and part of the intelligence gathering that they do is to actually speak to ordinary South Africans about how they feel. And that I find is quite useful too, in a completely different way. It gives us empirical information, which we can then input into our general understanding of the country and hopefully make more sense of things than we would otherwise. So Gabriel Crouse joins us in just a minute or two to find out what's going on with all of this on the ground.
See, I just want you to know that I'm deeply unhappy with the fact that you sent me the 30-page report at 9 p.m. 9 p.m., Sia. 9 p.m.
And Pumi being really good.
This was Sia in studio. And I thought I didn't actually send the full thing.
I just want you to know, Sia. I was like,
I feel the hurt, and I
had a
take
proper
the responsibility.
I had a proper moment. I was just like, swine.
Gabriel will take you through it.
We'll find out what Pumi thought of the report, because I know what she's like. Pumi's a bit of a nerd. She probably went through every single page.
Wanted to highlight her own notes and make citations.
Next up, the burning platform. Do you suffer from collectivism, collectivity, collectionitis? Do you have an obsession with objects? Are you a fanatic, a devotee, an aficionado? Cliff Central dispenses a weekly dose of collectomania. Join me as I talk to compulsive collectors. Fascinating, intriguing, possibly a little weird. Collectomania, Mondays on the Gareth Cliff Show. Brought to you by SA Gold Coin Exchange and the Scoin Shop.
Enjoy a great economic quarter with Nando's. Reduce wasteful spending by ordering a meal that's too good to waste. Get the quarter chicken with any single side for only 49 Rand. Nando's. Fire it up.
Central.com on a Thursday morning. It's time for the Burning Platform, which of course is brought to you by Nando's. Nando's, of course, not only very good at making the greatest meal and the greatest chicken in the world, and it really is in the world. A friend of mine lives in America, and he said one of his favorite things to do is he will actually go to Washington unnecessarily and Chicago just to stop at the Nando's because he misses Nando's so much. And he doesn't live anywhere near Washington or Chicago. But they don't just do that well. They also are not scared to be associated with whatever is going on in the news. You've seen plenty of their advertising. It is cheeky. It is clever. And we hope that the Burning Platform is cheeky and clever every week. We get to unpack all of the current affairs and all of the things that are going on in the world around us, try to make sense of them too. And the Burning Platform today is no different to all the others where we try to do that. Last week we had a bumper episode. We had a bitter old trade unionist on, and he complained bitterly, as a bitter old trade unionist would, about how rich all his friends were and how, unfortunately for him, he wasn't also rich. Some of his friends being our current president and people like Marcel Golding and Zwelinzi Mavavi and many of the others who've done extremely well, and he hasn't. So I would also be bitter and twisted if that was me. Let's talk to Gabriel Crouse this morning. Well, Pums, you know, if you look around and you see other people are so wealthy and they've become such capitalist sellouts, to kind of paraphrase him, I'd also be annoyed. Anyway, this morning we're talking to Gabriel Crouse. He's no stranger to the Burning Platform. He is from the Institute of Race Relations, and he does some really interesting things there. He, among other things, goes into the various parts of South Africa and asks people questions that make the rest of us sit up and think, and hopefully will also make the rest of us get a slightly better grip on what's actually going on and how people feel about things in the polity. So, Gabriel, nice to see you again. How are you?
I'm good, man. Thank you so much for having me. And how's it?
Pumi and I were thinking about this. I saw an article of yours that was published the other day about critical race theory. It's all that is absolutely it's all what's the term that they use? It's all I can't think of it now. It's such it's a massive trending topic.
It's all the rage right now.
Thank you, rage. Jesus, why did I think of that word? So it's all the rage in America. Critical race theory. There are people who are publishing books about it. There are people, a whole lot of terribly guilty white people who are reading all those books, and then they go on the internet and they say, I'm doing the work. And they show that they're reading this book about critical race theory by Ibram Kendi, or there's the one called White Fragility. And it's a massive, massive industry in America. Corporations are hiring these people to help explain how race and critical race theory is an important part of dealing with shit in America. What is your finding? Because you've published this report called Critical Race Theory and Race-Based Policy, a Threat to Liberal Democracy. What have you found in speaking to ordinary South Africans?
Okay, so two caveats. The one is that this report, which you can find on the IRR site, is by Anthea Jeffrey, and it is 30 pages long. It's a serious, in-depth deep dive, and Dr. Anthea Jeffrey is a legal scholar who's trained here and abroad in the UK. And the reason that matters is because critical race theory emerged as a legal theory, really crystallized in 1989 at the first critical race theory convention, but dating, it comes back from the Frankfurt School, which took some Marxist ideas and some good ideas, like you need first-person narratives to make sense of the numbers, and I'll try and do a bit of that here too. But yeah, absolutely, you're right. It was something that had been growing in America's universities, and I experienced some of this when I studied in America. I studied critical race theory for a summer in Ireland through Princeton University, and it was kind of trendy amongst hip youth, but it hadn't gone mainstream and hadn't gone corporate, and it hadn't gone political in the same way that it is today. As Anthea Jeffrey puts it, this theory has now been injected into the citadels of power. So we see critical race theory being espoused very much by Joe Biden's administration. We see very much a takeover of critical race theory in the mainstream, in many of the mainstream American newspapers. That's the first caveat. The second caveat is that, yes, I am an investigative journalist, and that means that sometimes when I can, I go out into the countryside, into rural South Africa, into urban South Africa, and ask people what they think. I try and figure out things about stories. But that's going to produce anecdotes. It's not going to produce data. To get data, you need to ask thousands of people. So we asked 2,500 people, demographically representative sample. And we didn't ask them ourselves because we have a clear ideological view. We are non-racialists. That's what we stand for. What's on the box is what's in the box. So we hired an independent company, Mark Data, which has been in the business for 30 years. It does surveys largely for corporates. And, I think that has a kind of credibility, actually. And they went and did these face-to-face interviews with people in the language of their choice with a randomly selected demographically representative sample of South Africans. The first question that we asked is, what is the...
Sorry, you've established the credibility there. And I mean, Anthea Jeffrey's written some really interesting things about inter alia, BEE, which I think have become useful to many of us in trying to ascertain whether things are good, bad, or ugly. So you've established that credibility. What questions did you ask people in the survey?
So the first question we asked is, what do you think is the major problem that is unresolved since 1994? Unprompted, you just say what you want to say. No list to pick from. Say what you want to say. Over 50% of South Africans say unemployment. If you break that down by race, it's very much the same, 56% of Black South Africans and so on. And just note, the exact number 56%, don't read too closely into that. It could be that it's actually 51% or 59%. There's a margin of error. Cool. Okay. Unemployment first, crime second, corruption third, education, housing, water, these all come in. And if you keep going down the list, at number 15 you find racism with 3%. So it's a very small minority identified racism as one of the two major issues that they think is not being resolved. Then
now,
yeah.
you watch the news, or if you were paying attention to the politicians, you would think that race would be right up there, maybe top 5, maybe even top 3.
Yeah, I really like a grand old journalist who was my writing mentor for many years, Rian Malan, who wrote My Traitor's Heart. He said to me when I first started in journalism, he said, the thing to know is that the Rainbow Nation is dead, and the tombstone is the daily headline, because the daily headline declares South Africans hate each other, we're on the brink of a race war, white monopoly capital's dominating, or black race nationalism is crushing everything. Racism is the big issue. That seems to be the daily story. That does not seem to be the daily experience of South Africans. So then next question that I think is very interesting to try and explain that difference is, have you personally experienced any form of racism over the last 5 years? 80% say no. And 80% of black South Africans, 81% of black South Africans said no, 83%, 87% of colored South Africans said no, and similar figures for Asian and white South Africans. So I think that's part of, I think that's encouraging.
Sure.
Clearly, when 20% of the population says that they have experienced in the last 5 years some personal aspects of racism, that's a problem. But it's not the major problem it's made out to be on the mainstream media, in parliament, and so on. So then we said, okay, so it's not nearly as big a problem as politicians and so on make it out to be. But is it a problem? Well, how do we solve this problem insofar as it's not the major problem? And we asked, with better education and more jobs, the present inequality between races will steadily disappear. Do you agree? 73% said yes. Only 11% disagreed, and 15% neither agreed nor disagreed. And going back to the racial breakdown, over 70% agree that just with better education and more jobs, the present inequality between races will steadily disappear. And that's 72% amongst black South Africans, 80% amongst colored South Africans, 78% amongst Asian South Africans, 72% amongst white South Africans. So again, what I take to be a very encouraging result, because clearly you have people sort of thinking that the non-racial path is the right way to go. But just to be perfectly clear, we asked again, the races need each other for progress, and there should be full opportunity for all. 71% agree with that. And that's an interesting finding, because if you go back to 2000, there was a famous survey where people were asked, do you think that apartheid was badly implemented, but it's basically a good idea? In other words, races shouldn't work together, people should separate and go out their own way. And at that time, a majority agreed. And between then and now, a supermajority now disagree with that. Only 11% agree, and 72% disagree with the thought that apartheid, that the good version of apartheid, if there can be such a thing, is a good idea at all. So I think that's great. And then if I can do one more, just before a further breakdown, we said, what's the best way to improve lives? Because this is still in the level of values. Now we're thinking about policy. And here we did give a list. We said, here's a list of 4 things, and you choose one as the best way to improve lives in this country. First option, more jobs and better education. Second option, better service delivery. Third option, more BEE and affirmative action in employment. Fourth option, more land reform. Now, if we were asking Parliament, you would have a majority saying more land reform or more BEE, some saying more service delivery, and some would say more jobs and better education. But the breakdown when you ask ordinary South Africans is 73% say more jobs and education are the best way to improve lives. 18% say better service delivery. And only 3% say more BEE. And only 4% say more land reform. So, it's clear as day. Yeah.
So this is fascinating stuff, and I have no reason to doubt. You've broken it down nicely. You explained to us how you did the survey, that you guys didn't even do it yourselves. It was independent. These are interesting, but the people who are interested in critical race theory and the people who draft those headlines that are on the tombstone of South Africa's Rainbow Nation, those people will say, oh, but the way you phrased the questions, they're going to find reasons to make it seem that you've prejudiced critical race theory. Can we just start? Because I think it's a good question here, and then I'm going to hand over to Pumi. But Duncan wants to know, what is the actual definition of critical race theory? Can you explain that to us? And how in academic circles it's explained to students?
Okay. I'm happy to do that. I'm sorry I'm disappearing from the screen.
No,
I just saw that my laptop's about to die, and so I have to plug it in. Here, I have the cable.
Okay, no problem. This is great to watch. We can see you in action.
Staying alive.
The pressure is on.
What is critical race theory? So critical race theory has, let's say, 3 key tenets. And the one key tenet is, the first key tenet, which I think is the most important, is that racism was this overt thing entrenched by governments through laws. And it was, people no one was ashamed to say in the public square that one race is superior to another.
This
Not
is
no
true.
one, but certainly.
It's basically true through human history, right? That no one's going to argue with that.
No, certainly not me. And then they say what happens is in South Africa and America and all around the world, as the laws become more non-racial, as sort of rule under, equality before the law becomes the norm, that doesn't mean racism goes away. It means it becomes insidious. But importantly, the key tenet is it doesn't decrease. It's not less of a problem. It's not less prevalent. In fact, it's everywhere. Everywhere that you look around, there is racism. You just have to put on your X-ray glasses to see it. And so the critical race theory answer to the problem of our polling is basically that Black people have false consciousness and white people have false consciousness. If they think they haven't personally experienced racism, that's just because they're too stupid to realize it. If they think that the best way to improve lives is by better education and more jobs, that's just because they're too naive to appreciate that if you just grow the economy in something like a meritocratic way, you're always going to have white people on top and you're always going to have Black people on the bottom. That's their supposition. And here's one way that I could make sense of it.
It seems to me a little bit racist to imagine that if purely on merit you let people do their thing, that Black people will end up at the bottom and white people end up at the top. That's demonstrably untrue.
Well, so exactly that. It's demonstrably untrue. It might have turned out to be the case. And I think this is an interesting, if you put yourself in the shoes of someone in the 1900s, just before World War I, when Europe was about to blow up into its own kind of race war, the Slavs against the Teutons, the Anglo-Saxons and the Gaels and the Italian Laurentians and so on.
A lot of eugenics going on and hard Darwinism and sure.
All that terrible stuff. Now, you might have thought to yourself, the whole world is largely being ruled by divine right kings and queens. There's very few democracies, and where there are democracies, they've been pretty overtly racist. Maybe it turns out that human beings are like this. Genetically, we might not be different across races, but we might be like genetically racist. It might just be the case that it's very, very hard for human beings not to judge each other by the color of their skin. It's very easy for us to sort of go along with the program that was around at the time. That's kind of baked into our nature, that we're just naturally, perversely, terribly racist beings. If that had turned out to be true, then I think critical race theory would be able to draw on a lot of evidence to support its conclusions, not just like anecdotes, which then are made to stand for everything, but actual demonstrable data. They'd be able to go out and survey people, for example, in a place like America or South Africa, and find that most South Africans are like, no, mustn't work together, and jobs are not really the problem, racism the problem, because it's like we're naturally just racist. It turns out that that's not true. It turns out that human beings are pretty good at getting along. We're also really, really good at making little teams where we do have an us-them grouping, but those teams can be oriented along a wide variety of axes. And in this regard, critical race theory has tried for many years to reject one of the most famous sociological analyses done around the time that critical race theory came to bear in the 80s and 90s, where a bunch of school kids in America on a summer camp this was the experiment done on them. They said, look, you guys that have green, everyone was white. They said, you guys who have green and blue eyes, you're on one team, and you guys who have brown eyes, you're on another team. and your teams need to compete. And at the end of it all, the best team is going to get a lacquer prize. And let's see how that goes. And it becomes Lord of the Flies. Within 5 days, they had to terminate the experiment because the children's lives were at stake, because they had become so vicious and cruel with each other. It is amazing how quickly you can program someone into a kind of us-them game where they become very, very nasty. The nicest thing about that study is that they did a follow-up a couple of years later, and they did a follow-up a few months later, and then another one a couple of years later. They found that all of those cliques and groups and whatever that had been built through this artificial team construct had then dissolved, because kids just found it so natural to then make other groupings, the nerds versus the jocks, or the ones who like this kind of music versus the ones who kind of like that music. It was very fluid. And various other studies have supported that result. So it turns out that we can reorient our core patterns of loyalty. And that's one thing that I think our surveys over the last 2 decades, in conjunct with others, show, is that South Africans really were more loyal to their race 25 years ago, largely. But that the grand project, the grand project of nation building, which is, I think, a word that has been so monopolized by a certain kind of political cabal and then discredited that no one uses it anymore. But it's actually happened. People have found themselves more loyal to their country than their race, and to other groupings. For example, your business colleagues.
I want to hand over to Pumi, because there's a lot going on here, and I'm sure she's got a bunch of questions and a bunch of comments to make. So Pums, over to you, and we can pick up again once Pumi's had a go, because I think otherwise it's so much info, Gabriel, that my head's about to explode. Pums,
it's early in the morning.
I know.
For me, there were two things when I started reading the report yesterday, but I'll come to that. Let's talk about the definitions of critical race and exactly the example that you use. I think what we forget is that human beings, like all animals, are survivalists. You're trying to survive. Hence, in the game, when there were two groupings and there was a clear competition that they had to go after, the kids were loyal, so loyal to their group that it became a Lord of the Flies. And it's like that in the world too. So in South Africa, it's like that. Is you're loyal to the thing that's going to allow you to survive. And unfortunately, we have a divide in South Africa where survival is also very much skewed on racial lines. And that's a historical thing. So, and I'm asking myself as I, read your thing, is if racism is so low on the priority of people's survival instinct, what are you trying to solve? It's not a problem. What are you trying to solve?
I love that question. What we want to solve at this stage in our history are the problems that are the most urgent, that make people the most desperate. So unemployment, to my mind, is the most urgent problem in South Africa. Most South Africans my age and younger don't have a job, are not in education or training. I know a little bit about what that's like. I was unemployed for about 6-9 months in my mid-20s. I made a kind of career change, wanted to be a journalist, couldn't find a job, was working really hard, ended up doing manual labor to try and make ends meet. That piece jobs didn't hold it together. And I was in a relatively cushy position. I know, especially what it does to young men. The lack of a sense of self-worth, the lack of a sense that I can contribute something to society that is validated by getting paid, the sense that I don't actually belong here because I can't find the same kind of place as my peers that have risen up the ladder. It's a desperate thing, and that's not even to get into the effects of malnutrition, of a lack of safety if you're sleeping on the streets, and so on and so forth. So unemployment is the most urgent problem, to my mind. And then we can go down the list. That's why it's so important to ask South Africans, what do you think is the route to solve the most urgent problems? Do you think it's more BEE? Do you think it's more race-based policy? Or do you think it's better education, for example, and the kind of structure that will increase the total jobs base, which to my mind is non-racial policy, for the simple reason that every investor conference and analyst that we've spoken to says that it is a deterrent to investment. BEE is a deterrent particularly to foreign direct investment, and also at this stage to some local investment because of the kind of association that it's come to have with corruption. We have also asked our respondents the very precise question: do you think, in terms of education, because the problem of unemployment is directly tied to the fact that our public school system has become the world's worst on a bang for buck basis, as the economists put it. It is the chief line item on the budget. We spend a quarter of all our national money on education, and yet we get terrible results. Something like 4 or 5% of students who started in grade 1 in 2008 finished with a matric pass in mathematics 10, 11, 12 years later, whatever it is. That is not a good situation. So we asked people, what do you think is the best way to solve this problem? Do you think it's a voucher system where the government will give you the equivalent amount that they spend per student in public schools, and then you can take that and go to any school you find, any private school, and you can pay with that voucher to send your kid there? So it's not going to be like St. Stithians or Hilton kind of fee, but you'll have 1,000 Rand a month or 2,000 Rand a month, whatever it is, coming from the government for you to spend at a private school of your choice. So you don't have to leave your children there where the teachers don't come up to school on Monday and they leave on Puza Thursday. You can send them wherever you want. Or more BEE. 70, 80% of respondents said, we want the voucher system. We do not want more BEE. The real problem is the problem that we're trying to solve. Is the problem of poverty, is the problem of unemployment, is the problem of poor education. And it's our view that the way to solve that problem is through a system of programs. We've laid this out actually in another long policy document called EED, Economic Empowerment for the Disadvantaged. We think that if you really go on a needs-based basis and find people with real needs, you can then pragmatically meet those needs. South Africa is not the first country to be in the kind of disastrous situation that we're in. South Korea, Ireland, in fact, most of Europe after World War II, countries have been in situations where they're poorer than us, where they've had higher inequality than us, where they've had worse literacy and education rates than us, and so on and so forth. And they have solved those problems by addressing those problems. And we believe that if you do that here, it will work just the same. In fact, we think it'll work better in part because we are such a fabulously interesting country. I think that that aspect of it does have an advantageous role. And we're very encouraged and heartened by the fact that most South Africans seem to agree with us.
Gabriel, I don't think Pumi's disagreeing with you about what our most urgent needs are, but I do think her question about race and why we're focused on it is important and interesting. So the report is not called The Biggest Problems in South Africa, ranked from 1 to 15. It's called Critical Race Theory and Race-Based Policy. So I wanted to quickly go back to race for a second. It does seem like we've gone through an enormous shift in attitude in the world, not just in South Africa, but maybe South Africa's played a large part in that. And correct me here, guys, if either of you think that I'm wrong or if I'm stretching a bit. The fact is, during my lifetime, racism has become so unpalatable in every quarter. I do not know of anyone brave enough or stupid enough to be overtly racist in any public forum or even in private fora, for that matter. Certainly, I don't know everybody. Certainly, this is anecdotal. Pums, I think there's an undersupply and an over-demand for racism if you look at kind of the things that the media are looking for. Like, I don't meet people on a daily basis, even on a monthly or week or year or annual basis, who are overt, out-and-out racist, because those people have been made, to use Mandela's words, the skunks of the world. You know, thanks to social media, there's such an opprobrium to these people now, and rightly so. I think the whole attitude to racism has changed significantly, and we perhaps with the benefit of hindsight, but the inability to take in that hindsight over a period of time because our memories are useless, we don't appreciate just how far we've come. To take an overtly racist stance on anything these days is to end your career, to assign yourself to the moral low ground, and to lose friends, actual friends. It impacts enormously and in the best ways, I think, on people when they are overtly racist. They are basically pariahs, and that we don't take enough cognizance of. This is important, especially in a country like ours, where race was the defining characteristic of how people were treated and how people treated you for thousands of years, right? Hundreds certainly, but maybe even thousands of years. It's amazing to see that now, and I think that's not without an enormous amount of effort. It's not without changes in policy. It's not without the evolution of the way we think about each other. And it's not without freedom in South Africa, which I think played its part in the international sphere when it comes to that. People like Nelson Mandela, people like Barack Obama. Those are the obvious ones to go for. But I think we've come a long way. In this country, it pleases me to know that race is like a 3% worry to most people. But your question still stands, Pums. Why then the focus on it?
So I think that a nice old line is that generals, the most common mistake that generals in war make is that they fight the last war. And if you study a little bit of military history, you really do find that the Brits in the Anglo-Boer War, for example, they were fighting with the lessons that they learned in the 1870s, fighting in Afghanistan and whatnot. If you look at World War I, people were fighting with the lessons that they learned in the Boer War. And those ones who stuck to those problems then lost. In World War II, the poor French were completely flattened in 6 weeks. Why? Because they were still using World War I tactics during World War II.
Yeah.
This is not just a problem for generals. It's a kind of human problem. The easiest battle to win is one that's already played out. So I think in large part what's happened in South Africa is that racism was the number one problem pretty much since this country's union in 1910 until somewhere let's in the last 3 decades. And
but
then it stopped being a major
problem. Are you then not in the same situation? Here you have a 30-page report based on what you admit is a 3% problem. You've got a 30-page report on it. You know what I'm saying? You're in the same place. When you did your study and you found that the biggest problem that people are talking about, have top of mind for them, is unemployment and safety and number 15 is race. And yet you decide that the report you are going to put out at the end of it is going to be about race. Not only is it going to be about race, it is going to be titled Critical Race Theory. So you've chosen the number 15 thing.
Is that a marketing decision? I mean, that because then that would explain it. If you wanted people to pay attention to it, then I understand. But then you're playing the same game as the media. It's like clickbait. Is that what you're doing?
No. I really like this question. So I distinguish quite clearly between racism and race-based policy. That's one distinction. So you can have a country where no one's a racist, but the law is racist. The law says we've got to discriminate one against another. People who look like this need a leg up. People who look like that need to take a back seat. And that is the law in South Africa. And our president has promised that that is going to continue to be the law for as long as he's in charge. I also distinguish between racism and critical race theory, which is on its own version an ideological viewpoint, something which has been argued in the academy and which is then translated into policy, as has been the case in the US, where you sort of have vaccination programs, for example, that are trying to discriminate on the basis of race, where you have education programs that are being rolled out that are basically asking for students to act in different ways according to their race. So to me, the law is its own entity. People are their own entity. It ought to be the case that the law reflects the best interests and values of the people. That's what democracy means. I remember when I was studying in America, a famous Princeton study came out, which argued that America is no longer a democracy. It is an oligarchy. And the way that argument was made was by surveying 1,000 polls and looking at what Americans' values and preferences were along a wide variety of questions: gun rights, abortion, affirmative action, healthcare, education, just the whole gamut. And looking, what are the values of Americans? What would they prefer? and what are their laws. And this study found that there was no relationship, that there was a zero effect relationship between what ordinary people wanted and what the laws were. How did they explain that? By reference to lobby groups, by reference to special interest groups, political capture. In other words, you can live in a country where the law doesn't reflect the values of the people because the law makers have been captured by big business and others. Mm-hmm. That seems very much to be the case in South Africa. I think it's very important to debate race-based policy. That is a big obstacle to economic growth.
But you have a choice. But you, as the Institute of Race Relations, and your stated objective is to help foster better race relations, right, amongst the people. It's the stated objective, and you have a choice. You can either shine a light on racism and what you term to be a race-based policy and what good it is not doing, or you could choose to shine a light. And by your own admission, you're saying, when you asked people what could change race relations for the better, and education was one of them, and employment is another. And instead of choosing to shine a light on that and crafting policy around that, which would move us forward, you're stuck at saying, you guys are doing this thing wrong, instead of saying, here is an alternative and this is what we could be doing better.
Yeah. Sorry, I should have been more clear. We have crafted EED, Economic Empowerment for the Disadvantaged. We crafted that about 10 years ago.
Right. Guys,
we also have been doing these surveys for 10 years.
And we stop this because I think we're in danger of talking about the IRR instead of talking about these findings or about South Africa. Sure. So I take Pumi's point, and I'm in agreement with her about, the marketing, the framing of this thing. But I do want to get to let's drill down into some of these things, because I think that there are interesting subjects in here that perhaps South Africa would like to know more about. And there are things that have political ramifications. Can we just for a moment turn away from the survey and look at some of the current affairs, look at some of the stories in the news? Because I believe this is, the most useful thing about the Burning Platform. We do learn new things, like this report that you've just published, but occasionally we also need to make sense of the things that are going on around us and that the media are telling us about. So let's just quickly refer, Pums, I know you're so bored with this, but the ANC, I mean, listen, guys, I almost don't know what to say on a weekly basis, because just when you think that the ANC can't shoot itself in another body part, it does. It finds a new place where it hasn't shot itself yet, and then it shoots itself there. So this week on Monday, Jacob Zuma went to court, and it turned into a rally with him and Yengeni and Ace and that silly Carl Niehaus. What do we make of the latest developments there? Is there anything new, Pums? Is there anything that we need to know?
There's nothing new under the Jacob Zuma sun. So once again, we have Jacob Zuma standing up and saying, I'm ready to go to court. I'm ready to stand trial. I'm ready at all. But in the meantime, right, I'm not willing to stand trial if the prosecution is not who I think is the right person, is because that's the section 106 I've come to understand is actually him fighting the prosecutor's authority to be the prosecutor in this case. If it's not the prosecutor that's the problem, then it's the judge that's the problem, then it's the court that's the problem. But hey, I'm ready to stand trial. I'm ready to stand trial as long as all of these other...
I demand my day in court. This is what all of them say.
Which, and it's more of the same. It's a little bit like, how can I pass this buck down the road until, well, probably until I'm dead at his age. He's probably hoping he can
he doesn't want to be
can evade the law. Until.
So, Pum, what do you make of the coalition that's coalescing around him? I mean, we knew that he and Ace were close because they were bosom buddies during his administration. The Premier League was what kind of made it happen. But there are other people who are creeping across, and there are people who are leaving that coalition and moving across to the Cyril Ramaphosa side of things. Is there anything surprising about that for you or not?
Guys, A coalition of thieves making revolutionary sounds. A coalition of thieves making revolutionary sounds, radical economic transformation, making those sounds just as something to hide behind, to hide their thievery. That's what we are.
Gabriel, anything to add on that before we move on?
Yeah, I can't help myself. We asked our survey respondents, do you think all this talk of racism and colonialism is just a way for politicians to seek excuses for their own failures? And a majority said yes. I do think that if there's one thing to say in favor of Zuma, it's that much like this bitter trade unionist that you mentioned at the start of it all, I think he does have some reason to feel unfairly treated. I don't think anyone can seriously argue that Zuma was alone, or that it was just him and Ace, or that it was just a few people that have been spotlighted in the media that were corrupt. There's demonstrable prima facie evidence of corruption against more than half of the members of the National Executive Council of the ANC. And it does, to my mind, seem as if, and this is not a new development, over the last 8 years or so, there's been a concerted effort to try and shift all of the blame onto one or two bad apples, then promise that we can get rid of those bad apples, and then everything will be good again. And from the perspective of one of those bad apples, it must feel kind of crappy to have stolen money with the next guy and the next guy and the next guy, and then you are the one who's targeted, and the other two flip to the Ramaphosa faction and are kind of venerated or excused. I don't think that's a legal argument, but I do think that there's a kind of something going on.
You know what they do have on their side? Take them down with you.
I completely agree.
This is the thing, Pumps. So do you think that
then
there are
go
people...
down.
There are people...
You need the prosecuting authority to help.
Jacob Zuma
you need the prosecuting authority to offer immunity.
So Jacob Zuma has been threatening from the get-go that he knows information about this one and this one and this one. He knows where all the bodies are buried, blah, blah, blah. And he probably does. But
then he must tell us who they are. Let them all go down.
But it's not up to him. Any criminal, anyone who's facing criminal prosecution that has the ability to bring down a whole lot of other people, they're only one side of the hand clapping. You need two hands to clap. You also need the NPA to then come forward and say, look, if you don't do this, you're going to jail. And if you do turn state's witness, then we will keep you out of jail. You can go and retire in Nkandla nicely. But then we want 1,000 people to go down. We want evidence. And if Jacob Zuma, by the way, Mark Data did a poll on this in 2017, and most South Africans thought that if Jacob Zuma turned state witness and tanked like 1,000 corrupt officials that are still in charge, they would be more than happy for him to sit pretty and sit down and die in Nkandla with his family around him. And I very much agree with that.
Yeah, I don't have any axe to grind. I feel like he is a scapegoat for so many others, and Pumi and you are both right about that. But please, the National Prosecuting Authority. I mean, Pums, there's another thing you and I.
Hello, Gareth. Hello, Gareth.
Talking about that? Shamila Batoy. If that name comes up anymore, this is the most irrelevant person in the universe. She's done absolutely sweet fuck all. You talk about two hands to clap. I think that there are people in this country who've been waiting to applaud her with bated breath. We all had such high hopes. She's done nothing. She is a complete letdown in every way. Okay, so ANC's off the menu. Let's move on. This is interesting. There have been in Bloemfontein this week, and I want to acknowledge for all our listeners in Bloemfontein what a shitty week they've had. The Mangaung municipality is under administration this week. There are massive water problems, massive electricity problems. Service delivery is zero in that city at the moment. There are also shops that just do not have any goods on the shelves.
And how's the underreporting on the absolute chaos that's ensued since Monday?
I kind of wish we had Lieto on, because he's in the Free State, and we had him on just a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying like he doesn't even know what to say anymore about the Free State. It's such a complete disaster, and this is wanton destruction by Ace Magashule when he was premier that has completely eviscerated any capability of service delivery in that province. The people of the Free State have had enough.
But this is the thing, Gareth, and I've said this before, that the circus, the three-ring circus that is ACE and the ANC and actually is a distraction. Because that's why I'm talking about the underreporting of what's happened in the Free State and what's happened in Mangaung and Bloemfontein over the past couple of days. Because everybody is in Pietermaritzburg. Everybody wants to cover that. Everybody wants to talk to ACE. Everybody wants to talk to Jacob Zuma. And we've got tweets and tweets and tweets. And every second headline is about what's being said by who and the prosecutor. Now we know what Section 106 is, But is anybody talking about the kid that was shot dead on Monday in the protests?
No. I mean, we know about it. I'll give credit because I saw this on the TV news. I saw it on ENCA, and I'm not giving that channel a plug just because I've got a show on there. But that's where I saw it. I don't see nearly as much reporting though. And Pumi's right. Like, what culpability do the media have in using clickbait stories, in only paying attention to the personality politics because they know that sells and they're in business as well? What culpability do they have?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a crisis of faith in the mainstream media. I think for that reason.
Crisis of faith.
Yeah.
I think our jobs allow us the time. They afford us the time to dig deeper and to really cover a broader ambit of news coverage. For people with other jobs who depend on an hour a day or whatever it is to kind of get a sense of what's going on that's really important. I think a lot of people just feel like they're being let down, like they are living in a more and more shadowy world with little spotlights curating the information that they're supposed to attend to in order really to sustain a commercial system, but also to sustain a narrative. And I do think that if we haven't asked people, do you trust the headline news? I suspect that most people would say no, and I think that lines up with what we have asked, where most people just seem to have a very different picture on a personal level of South Africa compared to what the headline outbreaks are. And I don't think that that's a good thing. I think that we have to. That's a problem that has to be solved. Societies that do well are societies that have a latent level of trust, which is potent and significant, so that people don't feel like they're navigating the space alone and like they have to, it also makes it tempting to fall for silly conspiracy theories and the worst kinds of...
Well, I'm glad Pumi brought this up because otherwise we would be talking about Jacob Zuma the whole way through this episode. Guys, I am loath to go there, but it is the biggest international story, and if we ignored it, we would be in dereliction of duty. There is shit going down, as there always is in the Middle East, but it is flared up again. It is more partisan than ever in South Africa and in the world. It seems to me that people are dividing along all kinds of ideological lines, along all kinds of tribal lines, along all kinds of religious lines around this. It is more complex than I can ever remember it having been, although it's a perennial problem. Israel and Gaza, what's going on with Hamas, with Benjamin Netanyahu, it's complex. It's by no means a simple thing. And I'm actually just not ready to talk about this, but we have to. Because if you talk, all it does is it gets you a huge amount of hate from the one side and a huge amount of love from the other. If you have that point of view, if you have the other point of view, it gets you a huge amount of hate from this side and a huge amount of love from the other. There's just no middle ground for anyone to understand this. Please, can either of you shed some light on things that we may have missed, or help us to figure out a way to make sense of this and to have conversations that add value? Because I can't say anything without getting into trouble on this matter.
Yeah, no, I doubt that any of us can. I think one thing to notice is that this does seem to be like the blue eyes, brown eyes thought experiment writ large, or sociological experiment writ large. It's like everyone has to be on red team or blue team. And if you don't belong nicely, if you try and straddle the lines, then you're also part of the problem. And I think that itself is something to confront, to notice, and to try and sidestep, try and look for really universal standards of values that can help navigate the conversation. In my best attempt to do that, I find myself being on the side of Palestinians and of Israelis not so much being on the side of Hamas. In fact, feeling like they are a major threat both to Palestinians and to Israelis. They are a terrorist organization. They do not adhere to anything like the rule of law, either outside or inside of war. They've got no respect for democracy or civil liberties. The Israeli leadership is clearly, there's blue water between that and Hamas. But the Israeli leadership also leaves a lot wanting. The scandals around Netanyahu, the inability of the Knesset to form a government in the last several years, and they keep having re-elections because they can't get it together, I think is a sign that most Israelis agree indicates that their leadership is in a crisis situation as well. So at least that's kind of 4 points of similarity. I think that the hardest thing for at least the position that I take, which I think is in some senses the most controversial, although it seems super obvious, is that my empathy for the Palestinians looks something like this. I think, Lord have mercy. The guys on the other side are launching targeted missiles at buildings around me, and they make some knock drop effects to try and conceal me from that. But look, people are still dying. Children are still dying. I could be one of them. Absolutely. But also, my own supposed leadership might kill me just as readily or use me as a human shield. So I'm damned on both sides. And I think that if one empathizes with that position, then the kind of geopolitical analysis that follows is not going to seem one-sided in the way that so much of this often does. But that's my weird view.
I feel like Bibi has become like Jacob Zuma, indefensible. Indefensible. I mean, he's been unable to form a government in 2 years. He's got corruption charges hanging over him, and he's just making bad decisions left, right, and center. He's become like Jacob Zuma. And, you know, the situation there is, it was bound to get to this. So everybody's been talking about Israel's Iron Dome. But actually, guys, there's so much weaponry in that Middle East that it's a tinderbox in any way. So Israel has gotten better, but Hamas has also got access to better weaponry too. So it's a shit show. It's a clusterfuck over there. And there is Gabriel.
You're right.
No, all I want to add to that, because
it's so polarized. It's so polarized because people are so jealous of their hurts, right, and their fears that they cannot open up their minds to what fears either side has, what real danger on either side, because they are so jealous of their position. Jealous of their position that if you say anything, oh my God, it's pro-Palestinian, therefore it is Zionist. You know, if you say this, then it's not a binary situation down there. It's not a binary situation.
You know, to go to Gabriel's point earlier, that you can both be empathetic and let's rather use the word compassionate. You can feel compassion for people who are suffering in Gaza, and you can also feel that Israel has the right to defend itself. Those are not mutually exclusive positions. But unfortunately, if you express any inkling of support for one side, or you show a little bit more feeling for one side in someone else's opinion than you do for the other, then you are immediately partisan, and there's no brooking that huge divide. There is also the question of Biden, and you know, for a while now, the Middle East was improving. And I want to know whether you guys think any of this has to do with what's going on in America. We can't ignore America's role in the Middle East. People who are anti-Israel say that America foments this, that America gives all kinds of support, military, financial, and otherwise, to Israel at the expense of all its neighbors. There are also people on the opposite side of that who say, if Israel didn't have America's support, they wouldn't be able to defend themselves. What do you guys make of America's role in this?
So if you, there's a great report in the National Review which makes the argument that Israel is no longer being sponsored by America because like 90% of the money that America gives to Israel for defense, Israel has to spend on American arms. So this is really just America's way of funding itself. Israel has become rich enough that it can pay for its own military. And with the alliances that it started to form with the Sunni-led states like Saudi Arabia, it's no longer in the threatened position that it once was. So the aid, I'm not sure that it's real aid in some senses. In this sense, it is. We have a report, and you can in the Business Day, Franz Crenier, the CEO of the IRR, writes about, amongst other things, the fact that the targeted missiles might be that are imported from America seem to be imported on a just-in-time basis, which is to say, it's not clear that Congress is going to release more of those. Short of that, Israel, if it gets targeted, especially by Hezbollah in Lebanon, which has at least 10 times more rockets than Hamas does in Gaza, their Iron Dome is going to take strain, and they're going to have to wipe out the rocket launch sites. But short of those targeted guided missiles, they're going to have to use more conventional weapons, which are sure to cause more conventional deaths. That's a problem. The other problem is that Iran, the mullahs of Tehran, have clearly been sponsoring terrorism, both with Hamas and Hezbollah. They want instability in the region. They want to humiliate the Sunnis. They want sort of everyone to be conjoined again in an anti-Israeli stance in that region. And the biggest shift in American politics is that the Biden administration is trying once again to make a deal with Iran, which means they are less likely to censure any movements or support that Iran gives either to Hezbollah or Hamas on the ground. And that puts Iran in a stronger position. And that puts Palestinians, in my view, in a weaker position, because it means that they are more likely to have rockets falling over their head, either from, as it were, their own side or from the other side, because the major nefarious actor in the region, Iran, now has a reason to feel bolder than it did a year ago.
Pums, you get the last word for this episode of The Burning Platform. You want to wrap up the Middle East for us, or do you have anything to add to what Gabriel just said about the U.S. involvement?
Dude, I stand on my word, and Gabriel's very succinct summary of all of that is, it's a shit show, y'all, and people are unwilling to move from their positions of fear.
Yeah. I mean, what are the potential outcomes here, guys? Because either it's going to be all-out war. I mean, if it's all-out war, as you say, if Hezbollah start joining in this fight, and Israel feels right, it's now or never, and they press a couple of buttons that really smoke the northern borders, then we've got open war, and I think that it's fairly clear that will be the most damaging for not only Israel's neighbors, but possibly for Israel itself. Although Israel, I suppose, in international relations terms, has nothing to lose anymore.
Because but domestic politics.
That's Netanyahu. That's the problem with Bibi Netanyahu.
And in particular with Israel's growth towards something like non-racialism or non-religious affiliation as a defining factor in its politics. Arab-Israeli relations within Israel have been improving. For the first time, it was looking like the sort of leading Arab party was going to be part of the ruling coalition. That seemed like a viable option. And I think a lot of people know about the number of Arabs that have entered the Supreme Court and all that kind of good stuff. That has been reversed just by what's happened now.
1/5 of Israel's population are Arab.
And that's already been reversed. Though that trust that I was talking about earlier, that trust has already been eroded seriously, including by Israeli police, I think, acting badly, but really by this opening up of the conflict. And if it gets to a stage of all-out war, then I think that one of the saddest things from an Israeli perspective is going to be that neighbors don't trust each other again. And that could lead to violence on a greater scale. But even if it doesn't, it just undermines what that country needs to thrive, which is a kind of content of character judgment one of another, where you take care of your neighbors. Doesn't matter how they look or who they pray to, because you belong together. This is you live together, and you must work together and love each other and go into the same parks. I mean, that sounds all very cushy and silly, but I was just in Emmarentia Park yesterday. It's so nice. It's so nice to be in a part of South Africa which is super diverse, and everyone's getting along and pushing their prams and flying their kites. That really is a kind of litmus test for the health of a society. And I think that is that litmus test, apply that litmus test to Israel in a year, and it's going to have a very different outcome if there is all-out conflict. And if you get the wrong result on that test, I think political accountability, reason-responsive government, and true liberty really do become impossible.
All right, guys, I'm going to wrap it up there. And thank you. If we'd have avoided and ignored the question of Israel and Gaza, we would have been making all the overtures to those people who say, "Oh, you're not talking about it. You're trying to avoid it." The fact is, I am trying to avoid it. It doesn't lead to any positive moves on social media. You end up becoming polarized by both sides in terms of what your position is. Other people put words in your mouth. It's just horrible. This is it for me talking about the Middle East until we absolutely have to again. Because unfortunately, the result for those of us who don't have a dog in the fight, I've said this before in terms of my own position, I do not have a dog in this fight. The problem is, because it's so absolutely abysmal in terms of how partisan people become, those of us who might want to have an opinion about this, those of us who might care about things there, are loath to enter the conversation. And therefore, I'm closing this chapter on Israel and Gaza. I'm not interested in talking about it again on the show. I'm going to pretend it doesn't exist, which is not helpful, I know. But I'm just not prepared to go there anymore. And thank you, Pumi and Gabriel. Your analysis of everything here this morning has been tremendously useful, and well done on that report. Gabriel, it's very interesting stuff. Looking forward to reading it. And Pumi did. She's really good about this. She read it last night. I'll read it today. Okay, guys, have a happy day. Pumi, thank you. Gabriel, thank you. Most especially thank you to you for joining us. We will see you tomorrow morning at 6 a.m.